Today's lesson is on crafting introductions for your research paper, and this can also apply to other types of papers as well. So one question is, why bother to spend time on the introduction? Your introduction is your readers' or viewers' first impression of your work. So if your introduction is shoddy, if you haven't given it a lot of care and attention, then the reader's or viewer's first impression is going to be that this is not going to be quality work. So even though it's only a very small portion of your paper, it's important to make that first impression memorable. Second, it also is a roadmap for your paper. So when you lay out your thesis, it's going to basically explain what your whole paper is going to be about. And then that third piece is it's an entry to your thoughts. It's a bridge from the reader's real lives to your world. You have been immersed in writing your paper for weeks, but your reader has not. So that's a common mistake I see, is that there's a lot of assumptions that are made that whoever is reading your work knows what you're talking about, kind of knows what's in your head. So you need to make sure that you're very explicit and that you kind of warm your reader up to your topic before you just jump right into whatever it is you're writing about. What do I include in my intro? You need to have something that gets your reader's attention, a hook. You need to set the context. What is your research about? And then, of course, you'll have your thesis statement, which ties into the themes in Fahrenheit 451 and what is happening with those themes that we see today. All right, so let's talk about some effective introductions. So one is an apt quotation, and I want you to be very careful with this because the quotation that you choose, if you do this, needs to apply to your topic in a very clear way. So when I read this quotation, the most technologically efficient machine that man has ever invented was the book. This goes along with Fahrenheit 451 very clearly. We know we're talking about technology and we're talking about books. So this quotation is going along with Bradbury's point of view that we don't necessarily need all the gadgets and gizmos and bells and whistles that technology offers us, because really books are very efficient. Okay, another way you can start is with a hypothetical scenario. Imagine a world where you never know sadness, disappointment, hurt, or anger. All of your needs are taken care of. Entertainment is always at your fingertips, and a pill will help you relax. Is this happiness? Okay, I've actually combined two. I've combined a hypothetical situation. So this is nice because it helps your reader to come into your world, right? It's drawing you in to the topic. So the question is this happiness? So obviously, if you're writing this hypothetical scenario, you would be writing about happiness and exploring this concept of what does it mean to be happy. A personal anecdote. So this might be a good place to talk about your point of view as you're writing. I've given you the option to write a more argumentative style paper or just a straightforward analysis. I think a personal anecdote would work better probably with an argumentative paper where you're really trying to drive home a point. So let's read this one and see how it goes. We were curious. This book was all over social media and it was made into a movie. I know there were at least a couple of copies of the book in our school library, so it must have passed some type of librarian test to make the cut. So why were some of the parents upset? It's not like we don't know about suicide. It's not like if you take the books from the school library, we won't have access to it by some other means. Besides, we should be talking about this. Why should this book be censored because a few people don't agree with it? Right, notice that I did use personal pronouns here because if you're telling a story a personal story, you're going to use personal pronouns. And I've had a few of you ask me about this. Now, if you're writing a very strict, straightforward, academic style research paper, you're not going to have personal anecdotes in this. But the way we're writing this paper is it's a little bit more of a hybrid. It's not a purely research paper. We're doing some comparing and contrasting and analysis of a book while inserting research to back up our points. So if you do this, I think it's okay to use some personal pronouns. I think when you get into your heavy research where you're actually using your sources, you want to stay in third person, right? So you only use personal pronouns when absolutely necessary. Okay, another way you can do this, and I've actually embedded this in some of the other techniques we've looked at, is a thought-provoking question. Be careful with this one, okay? It needs to be thought-provoking, not just a filler question like, what do you think about technology? That is not a good question. So let's look at this one. What would happen if we gave up our smartphones, our video games, and our televisions for 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or perhaps forever? Okay, makes you think a little bit. And for all you creative minds out there, you can do a creative introduction, maybe where you're using some figurative language, creating metaphors. So let's look at this one. Happiness is that perfect summer day with your loved one on the beach after you have been alone on the frozen tundra. Okay, so once again, we're exploring this idea of happiness. What is happiness? Is it, having a lot of money? Is it being with people? Is it, you can't truly know happiness until you've known sadness or hardship. So it kind of begs that question. All right, we've looked at some more effective introductions. Let's look at less effective introductions. These are things you want to avoid. Okay, I call this the placeholder. Introductions coming soon. This is where you basically reword the objective or the prompt, and it feels very academic, but it's a little stiff, and it's not, you haven't given your unique stamp on it, right? You haven't really gone through all those processes of, refining your statement. So the objective of this paper is to explore Ray Bradbury's ideas about censorship in Fahrenheit 451 and compare it to censorship in the United States today. Well, yes, but we need to be a little bit more specific about what you're really diving into. So I call this the placeholder because it's not a bad place to start, but it needs some revision. And you may start with something like this, and as you're writing your paper, your thesis will become more refined. So I'll say this later, but your thesis statement, it's a recursive process, meaning you keep coming back to it. You don't just write your thesis statement and it's done. You keep coming back to make sure that your paper really is about what you're saying it's about. The dictionary introduction. This is one of my least favorite. Please do not start with a dictionary definition of anything. What is censorship? According to Webster's dictionary, censorship is the act of suppressing or deleting material that is objectionable. This is one of those intros that might be okay to do when you're younger, but it's just not very sophisticated, and it doesn't grab your reader's attention at all. If you want to embed a definition somewhere in your introduction, if you feel like it's something that's not well defined, don't do it as your opener. Work it in somewhere else, but don't have the dictionary definition be the first thing that your reader sees. Okay, the dawn of man introduction. Happiness has been an important value in all cultures since the beginning of time. Okay, it's just a little bit cliche. Woo! Okay, this is one of my favorite ones. The insert a question as if you and the reader are buddies having a conversation intro. Have you ever thought about what it truly means to be happy? If you're like me, you probably haven't given this a lot of thought, but it is an important question, right? All right, the tone of this is too conversational. You have a question, and it's not, it's not a bad question. Have you ever thought about what it truly means to be happy? I mean, that's a legitimate question, but I think you can word it in a more creative way if you go back to, the question that we looked at earlier. That's an effective question. That's the strategy you want to go for. Not like, hey friend, have you ever thought about this? You don't want it to have that conversational tone. It needs to go a little deeper. And then there's the I am going to tell you introduction. For this essay, I am going to explain how Ray Bradbury felt about happiness and how that compares to our ideas about happiness today. This is similar to the placeholder. You've got all the elements there. You're going to talk about Ray Bradbury's position on happiness. You're going to explain that you're going to compare it to today, but it just hasn't really evolved yet, right? That's kind of a placeholder. It just sounds unsophisticated, underdeveloped. Okay, thesis statements. If you want a little more help on thesis statements, even if you think you've got it for your thesis statement, I highly recommend you go watch this YouTube video. It's 4 minutes long. I promise it's short and sweet. It's worth your time. She talks about the process you go through, right? When you write that first thesis statement and then coming back to it and revising. And she just gives you some little tips on that. And I think it's really well done. And I've said this a little bit throughout, but a good thesis statement goes through an evolutionary process. In other words, it's probably going to change over time. As you develop your ideas with source examples and begin to draw conclusions or hone your argument, your thesis should become more clear and specific and defined. So at this point, if you've watched the video and you have you've watched my video and the YouTube video that I posted, I'd like you to go back, look at the objectives and your essential question that you chose. And then I want you to make sure that as you construct your thesis that you keep these objectives and essential questions in mind. You should have some of the wording in there, obviously, but you also need to have your own explanation of exactly what you're talking about with censorship or with happiness or with technology. Okay, define Bradbury's position. What does he specifically say? Make sure that you include the title of the novel in your thesis or in your introduction somewhere. All right, I hope that gives you some help on writing your introduction. I look forward to seeing them.